Welcome to Fridays with a Forester. We thank you for joining us today. This is April 21st, and our topic is Keep Your Woods Healthy and Resilient. My name is Gary Wyatt, Extension Educator with the University of Minnesota Extension, based out of our Mankato Region office, part of our forestry team. Also helping host a webinar today is Lauren Beckus, and she's out of the Andover office. So we really appreciate her help in today's managing our webinar. Today's topic and speaker is Keep Your Woods Healthy and Resilient by Eli Segor. He's our forestry co-leader and leader actually in our forestry team at the University of Minnesota Extension, and has other jobs, and he can explain that too. But very much active in the forest industry and professional forest that he manages, as well as some of the educational programs that we have professional foresters. So details on the Zoom. This is a Zoom webinar. It's not a Zoom meeting. So you'll be allowed to ask questions in the Q&A and also the chat. Lauren and I will be monitoring the Q&A and chat at the end of the presentation of Eli's. And then we are recording all these sessions with Fridays with a Forester, and they'll be at the Z-link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. So Eli, I'm going to stop sharing and you can begin.
Sounds good. Thanks, Gary. Let me get to the right place here. Share. All right. Looks like it's coming through okay. Are you seeing what you should be seeing? Good.
Yes, very good.
Great. Well, hey, everybody. Gary, thanks for the introduction. And Lauren, thanks for your help getting this all working. I'm glad to be back. I really enjoy this series. Gary got this idea during the pandemic to do these bi-weekly informal gatherings, and they have gone really well. It's really been fun. It's fun for us to connect with landowners and others who choose to tune in. Welcome to all of you, and I hope that this will be useful. We've got an hour. I don't plan to talk for that whole time, but I'll talk for a little bit. I encourage you to post questions at any time. And Gary and Lauren, Gary, you at least know my style. I'm really happy to be interrupted at any time. So if I say something that isn't clear, don't hesitate to break in.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So keeping your woods healthy and resilient. Let's get into it. I start a lot of my talks with this slide. This picture, I took this, I don't know, 13, 14, 15 years ago. That's Dave Jacobson standing, just a coincidence, I guess, that he's wearing maroon and gold. He's not affiliated with the University of Minnesota. Woodland owner in the middle of the state who has done, as you can see, a really impressive job restoring bur oak savanna and tallgrass prairie. And I was out there with a Minnesota Society of American Foresters field day, and Dave handed around the photo that you see me holding there as we were looking at this savanna 14 years later. And this to me is really just a reminder of the positive impact that we can have as woodland owners and woodland stewards over the long term. Looking at this bare field 14 years before, and then a really nicely restored oak stand and prairie. And I would love to get back to it now. It's been about another 14, 15 years, and I'm sure it looks even better now, although I haven't been back since this day. So I like to just start talks, as I said, with kind of a reminder, bringing back to the front of our minds the positive impact we can have through the hard work we put into our woods and the care we take of them. And that's really the topic today. Another kind of preliminary thing, all of my slides are available. You can download them or look at them. You'll see a number of links in the slideshow as I go along. And in the version, if you follow the link on your screen now, then you'll have that later. And Gary, I don't know if we do an email follow-up or what, but we can certainly send this out to you as well. And if you're not, I'm going to move to the next slide here in a moment. So if you don't write it down quickly enough, don't worry. Again, we can follow up and get it to you, and it'll appear on my last slide as well. So you'll see this link again later in the presentation. I'm going to start my talk with a few slides that I've borrowed from our friends in Extension over at the Climate Adaptation Partnership. This is not a talk about climate change. But it is important to note some things when we think about, this long-term perspective. And I just showed you a 14-year change, but we all know we're managing our woods for much longer than that. We need to be mindful of what's going on in the world around us. So just a few kind of observational records. The 10 wettest and warmest years on record, and the records go back maybe 130 years, depending on what exactly is being measured. All 10 of those have occurred after 1997. That was when I graduated university, 1996. So all 10 of the hottest years ever recorded were in the last 25 or so. We have observed, measured a 13% increase in the heaviest rainfall of the year. That doesn't mean overall rainfall, but I have another slide on this in a moment. Really heavy rainfalls have increased by a lot. And the growing season has lengthened by about 2 weeks since 1950. And here in Minnesota, we're proud of our winters. We're so proud of them that we don't want them to ever end. At least that's our experience this year and some other recent years. But if the growing season's longer, then on average, at least the winters are shorter. And if you think about forest management and how timber is harvested in Minnesota, those shorter winters and milder winters have a big impact on our ability to do that. Overall, Minnesota's average temp has increased about 3 degrees Fahrenheit since the late 1800s. The difference and the details here are not super important, but what I want you to notice here is that if you look at so the left side is how temperatures have changed across the entire year. So the average temperature across the full year. If you look at the middle figure, you see how things have changed in different parts of Minnesota in the summer. Over here, you see what I was just talking about, how those temps have changed. Again, this is just based on temperature measurements from people's backyards and weather stations, how those have changed since the late 1800s in winter. So entire year, summer, not much change in the summer, a lot of change comparatively in the winter. I mentioned before rainfall. This is my third and final slide from the Climate Adaptation Partnership. And if you look at these maps of Minnesota, you can see that rainfalls that average annual rainfall, including a really noticeable change in these big rain events, have been occurring steadily over the last century and a bit. So it looks like we're getting warmer and a little bit wetter. Okay, so again, this isn't a talk about climate. We've got others who can address this topic better than I can, but I think it's important to put some of these things up and keep them in mind as we think about forest health. We can also think a little bit about how different trees are going to respond to those changes. So we have some new products that are available that can help us to think about, okay, winters are going to be milder, so what? Is that going to affect our trees? Does that affect subboreal trees, meaning trees whose range is mostly north of us? Does it affect those trees more than it affects trees that might be predominantly south of us? Maybe think of oaks being primarily south of us, black spruce and other species being primarily north of us. So do those climate changes affect those different species in different ways? Resources like this Climate Change Atlas can help us answer that. And I've got a couple more slides, including a link to this atlas if you want to check it out. It's fairly easy to use, just to get a sense for how the trees on your property might be expected to change in future years. So the way that this site works is that it shows a couple of maps side by side. You see right here, I've got that the link to the climate change tree atlas. So in the live version, you see when I mouse over it, that becomes a live link. So if you look at the slides afterwards, you can follow this link and check it out yourself. Basically on the left, we see FIA, which is current forest inventory and analysis. So this is what we have in our woods now. And then if you look ahead to the year 2100, so about 80 years into the future, 75, 80 years into the future, you see the projected how the climate is likely to, how well the climate is likely to suit whatever species you're looking at. And you see here, I've pulled up northern red oak. So just like we'd expect, if you know Minnesota's woods, northern red oak is kind of in this belt through the middle of the state currently. And the darker and the bluer, the higher what's called the importance value, the more, basically the more common the species is. Looking to the future, red oak is expected to be far more common. At least the climate will be such that it'll favor the growth of red oak in the future across much more of northern Minnesota in particular than it does now. So some of these changes really are important to consider as we think about our future woods. Black spruce, this is one that I'm surprised the change doesn't look bigger. Again, on the left side, you see a fair bit of blue, but black spruce is mostly confined to northern Minnesota. And of course, if we had adjacent Canada on this map, you'd see it all over the place up in Canada. In the future, though, we do see a little bit less blue, not a dramatic change. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the context of climate refuges and things you can do on your land. But you see black spruce still present, but a little bit less abundant or a little bit less common across the range. Another way to look at some of this, so this one is looking to 2069, not to 2100, so that's only about 45 years from now. This is some work that was done by Lee Freilich in our Department of Forest Resources and Sue Galadowicz and Laura Phillips-Mao back 13, 14 years ago. And what they did is they pulled up, they created a map of Minnesota, and I'll just look at this one in the middle. It's in the middle of the screen, so we'll focus in on this one. What you see here is a dark gray area, which is kind of the current or the location of interest. So, and they're looking at the current climate there and saying, okay, if we project forward to 2060 to 2069, so for that decade, the 2060s, what will the climate, what part of the region today has a climate that's similar to what we expect for that area in the 2060s? It's a little bit convoluted. So again, if we look at this dark gray area now, we know its current climate. We know we can just go there. We can look at temperature records, whatever. In 2060 to 2069, the climate here is supposed to be like what we currently see in this swath kind of across southern Iowa. You can do similar things for these other areas, the Arrowhead, northeast Minnesota. In 2060s or so, the climate there is expected to be something like what we see across kind of south central Minnesota. Central Lakes, what's that, Brainerd up to Bemidji and over to kind of Grand Rapids and other towns in that area, maybe just about getting down to Duluth. Climate there, we know what that's like now. 2060s, it's expected to be more like northwestern Iowa. Now, all of this, so before I was telling you about measurements and observed data, obviously what I'm talking about now is best guesses. And without a doubt, they're wrong. They're not exactly perfect. On the other hand, if we look at the general trend, and if we, there's some validity and certainly there's value in this kind of work, what we see is that ranges are moving or climatic conditions are moving kind of to the north and to the east. In just about every case, we see, if we want to know the climate of the future, we should look a little bit south and a little bit west of where we are now. Again, you can explore, there's an article linked here. You can explore this further if you're interested later. Why does this matter? Well, as I said before, growing trees is a long-term enterprise. Trees live a long time. You can't just change trees next year. And one of the ways that we see these changes playing out is with tamarack and eastern larch beetle. So Brian Akama, forest entomologist here at the University of Minnesota, and his graduate students have done work over the last several years looking at the impacts of eastern larch beetle, which is a native insect. It's not invasive. It's from here. It's a native insect that has always coexisted with tamarack. But in recent years, it has caused tamarack mortality that's really intense, as you can see pictured here, and much, much, much more widespread than normal. And the reason that Brian and his team figured out that that's happening is that instead of one generation per year, with that 2-week longer growing season, that's just long enough that they're getting in an extra generation. And if you know anything about geometric or exponential growth, that means a huge number, way more beetles than there would have been otherwise. So that extra generation doesn't just double the number of beetles in these stands, it increases them by an exponential factor, and that's just overwhelming the trees. So there's concern. It's not that we're going to lose all of our tamarack, they're all going to die and be gone. That's not the case. But there is concern about the relationship between climate and trees. And so as you think about how to keep your woods healthy and resilient, you at least want to be aware of the kinds of issues that we're observing across the state as exemplified by this. So climate is changing a bit. It is impacting our trees. And as woodland stewards, we need to be thinking a little bit about what to do about that. So that's what I'll talk about next. I'm going to talk about 3 things. I'm going to talk about the idea of diversity. There is an awful lot we can do. We are not powerless in this case at all. So I'll talk about steps you can take to increase diversity. I'll talk a bit about native plant communities and this idea of, as you're thinking about what to do in your woods, this idea of favoring the natural trajectory. So understanding what's happening naturally in your woods. And then I'll just talk about some kind of practical considerations, some things that relate to how you get it done. So diversity is a very simple concept. Under uncertain conditions, hedge your bets. So don't put all your eggs in one basket. We've got lots of these expressions to guide us here, and I think we're all familiar with the basic concept. I'm going to pause for just a moment. You can read this on your screen, and then I'll come back and discuss it. So I think you're all probably familiar with the basic idea here. When we have a diverse forest or a diverse ecosystem, different plants, different animals, different components of that ecosystem behave differently. They respond differently to disturbance. They respond differently to drought. They respond differently to flood. Some of them have deep, deep roots that allow them to access water that's deep in the soil profile. Others have really shallow roots, which enable them, or even roots that are above ground, which we see in a lot of black ash stands, that enable them to obtain oxygen, even if the soil is saturated and oxygen is depleted in the soil. Soil does contain a lot of oxygen, and tree roots really need it in order to grow, for trees to grow. So if we think about functional diversity, or you might think of it as response diversity, how are the different components going to respond differently to disturbance? This is really a key idea to keeping your woods healthy. So we think first probably about diversity in our forests in the context of species. So we might think, hey, we want lots of different species. Okay, that's true. We do, more diverse species mixes. That's part of it, but that's not all of it. Age classes. So if you have young trees and old trees, those will respond differently. If you have big trees and small trees, obviously that's related to age. Those will respond differently in some dramatic ways. I'll show you a slide on that in a moment. Same tree species, same age. If they have different genetics, if they're from different seed sources, that may make a difference. So if you're growing bur oak from Iowa next to bur oak from north central Minnesota, you might expect those 2 seed sources or those 2 bur oaks to behave differently or to respond differently. The southern seed source might be a little bit better adapted to drier conditions because of its provenance. Diversity in stand structure. So again, big trees, small trees, openings, gaps, dense parts of the stand. In dense old stands, trees can protect one another from wind. Edges can be more vulnerable to wind. So a variety of stand structures can help. And even just thinking more broadly, reproductive modes. So you might be familiar with jack pine. Jack pine has serotinous cones. That means that they will generally stay tightly closed until they reach about 140 degrees Fahrenheit. That really, in Minnesota, only happens in a fire. When there's a fire that goes through and heats up the stand and heats up those cones and kills most of the understory, those cones open up, releasing their seed just at the moment where there's a pulse of nutrients caused by that ash, and lots of growing space caused by the fire opening things up. And so serotinous seed, other species have similar adaptations, can help that species, jack pine, respond well to fire. That's just one kind of disturbance, but jack pine can do that. Some species have seed that can thrive for a long time in the seed bank. Black cherry, hate to say it, but buckthorn, a number of other species can remain viable. The seed bank refers to the soil, can remain viable in the soil for years, waiting for the wind to blow the stand over and open up growing space, or waiting for some other disturbance to occur to create an opportunity for them to grow. Sprouting, suckering, if you're familiar with aspen, no doubt you have seen stands where gaps open up, whether it's from timber harvest or some other disturbance around a stand that might only have a couple of aspen in it. And all of a sudden you've got suckers. Suckers grow from roots, sprouts grow from stems. You've got suckers growing up super, super densely. We call it dog hair aspen stands, these stands with tens of thousands of stems per acre. That's an adaptation, obviously, that allows aspen to colonize newly created gaps. Sprouting, again, refers to stump sprouts generally. So if a tree is cut or if it blows over, you'll often see stump sprouts growing up that way. That's very, very common in basswood. You see a lot of multi-stemmed basswood trees. That's the result of stump sprouting from decades and decades ago. Birch, paper birch does that a lot as well. So response diversity. This is the picture I referred to earlier when I was talking about the difference between young and old trees and trees of different species. If you've been around Minnesota for a while, you might remember the 1999 blowdown in northern Minnesota had a huge impact across a lot of the boundary waters. I took this picture in up near the end of the Gunflint Trail sometime in the summer of 2000. And you can see a lot of destruction here. I mean, if you look at this hillside back here, a lot of those trees are gone. If you look in the foreground, we've got aspen broken off. We've got trees of other species. This looks like a white pine that I don't think has any branches. It looks like there are a couple, but I think that's from the tree behind. Certainly it's lost its top. But then you see a number of other species that have done just fine, and trees that have done just fine. So a lot of birch blew down, but look at this one, this thin kind of young tree in the foreground. It's doing great. No damage there at all. No doubt that tree blew, bent way over during the storm, but it's popped back up because it didn't break. Young trees have much more flexible stems than older trees. Here's looks like either a white spruce or a balsam fir growing in the understory that was kind of protected from the wind by these surrounding trees and also its flexible stem. So you see a lot of trees broken off and bent over. This is a mess, but very different responses. So again, response diversity. This picture just really illustrates how trees of different species and different sizes and ages respond differently, even to really, really intense storms. So what can you do about this? This is funny. This is a little bit out of order here, but I'm just going to go into it because it's here. So what can you do to promote diversity that allows your woods or whatever woods you're taking care of to thrive? Because we don't know. You don't know when that storm is going to hit or if it's ever going to hit. You don't know when the flood or drought is going to come. So you can't just prepare your woods for one kind of disturbance. You can't just say, hey, I don't have to worry because I don't have any tamarack, so the eastern larch beetle aren't going to get me. Well, yeah, but emerald ash borer mite or some other not yet introduced insect or other threat mite. And so again, when we think about diversity, what can we do about that? Well, one thing you can do is to increase the species mix. I've got a couple of pictures here that I took on Blandin Paper Company lands. So the Blandin Paper Company is obviously a wood products company based in Grand Rapids. They've been there for many decades. And they have learned that they can grow both aspen and spruce more efficiently in mixed stands on some sites than they can grow either one in pure stands. So spruce does really well in a shady understory. Aspen doesn't. Aspen needs full sunlight. But if you can establish after a clear cut a new stand that includes both aspen and spruce, and if you can make sure the spruce has a little bit of growing space so it doesn't get shaded out and killed, you can produce these mixed stands. Then at age 35 or 40 or whatever, whenever the aspen reaches maturity, you can go in, harvest the aspen, leave the spruce, and then sometime later, you'll have a mature spruce stand that, you know, at that time of that first harvest is well on its way. So you don't have to start over with a new stand. And Blandin has found that, again, on some sites, that approach works very well. And this has become really an important part of how they manage their company lands. We've all seen this. I took this picture near Carrick, Minnesota, over in the sort of east central part of the state, right near the Wisconsin border. You see spruce invading under aspen, in this case, aspen stands, also birch and other species. Again, it's shade tolerant, and bringing in a shade tolerant conifer to supplement light demanding hardwood can diversify these stands in ways that can be beneficial in you know, for the reasons that I just kind of explained with Blandin's silvicultural approach. So you can either actively try to establish mixed stands, or you can just kind of promote this and let this happen on its own. Maybe you underplant if you've got a mature aspen or other kind of stand, and then do a little bit of clearing or opening up to create some growing space. It's just another picture of a kind of middle-aged, maybe this might be 15, 16-year-old aspen spruce mixed stand on Blandin Paper Company lands. This is another idea. I always, whenever I get here, I realize I need to swap out this picture. I used the same picture again. But this idea of bulking seed lots. So a few years ago, we did a webinar that was really, really neat. We had Rebecca Montgomery, Carrie Pike, and Rick Claiborne. Rebecca is a forest ecologist and tree physiologist here at the university. Carrie Pike is now with the Forest Service in Indiana, but she's the former director of the Cloquet Forestry Center, and she's a forest geneticist. Rick Claiborne was the former silviculture, state silviculturist at the Department of Natural Resources. And we had the three of them together in Cloquet to talk about, what do we do? What should we do about tree genetics? And Rick had this idea that the other two liked a lot about bulking seed lots or mixing seed for broadcast application. So sometimes you might just spread seed in your woods. And if you're able, and this might apply more to DNR, you know, a large agency than it would to you or me. It might be harder for us to necessarily get, you know, 2 scoops of local seed and 1 from a seed zone south of us. But that idea, you know, we're all creative. Woodland owners are incredibly creative people. And it's more the idea than the actual, you know, how do you exactly do it? There's a lot of work happening now. My colleague Jeff Jackson is ramping up in partnership with the Nature Conservancy and some other partners, some new programming that I hope we'll be delivering in the next couple of years around seed collection. So some of you out there, and I see we've got a great crowd online, some of you might be interested in collecting and selling seed. Others might be interested in collecting seed to use on your own property. And this idea, not of putting all your eggs in one basket, not of saying, oh my goodness, his slide told me that I should be planting stuff from Southern Iowa. I'm going to go to Southern Iowa and that's all I'm going to put in. It's not like that. That's not a good idea. But mixing and you know, hedging your bets, again, can be a good, sound approach. I want to talk just really briefly about native plant communities. This is a little bit more complex than most woodland owners and woodland stewards are going to be interested in. Professional land managers in Minnesota deal with this stuff daily, but it's rather complex, but I think it's useful for folks to be aware. So I talked earlier about the distribution of red oak, and you're probably familiar with Minnesota's ecology. Minnesota has, this shows 3 biomes, really up here is kind of a 4th biome, the Aspen Parklands. But there are characteristic differences in the climate and the soils, and certainly the tree and plant species that we see in these different parts of the state. And so if you start with that general idea that it's not just a coincidence that we have prairies in the Southwest, there are factors that drive that, ecological and climate and other factors driving those differences. If you just start with that basic idea, then you can drill down more and more at a finer and finer geographic and ecological scale to get into similar types of differences that occur throughout the state. And these are all nested plant communities, nested ecological communities within one another geographically. Again, I'm not going to talk much about this, but I do have a link. Do I have a link? I don't have a link. I'll find you a link. I must have moved that slide. Or you can just Google DNR Ecological Classification System. This is kind of neat to poke around. I mean, if you're curious about, what kind of plant community do I have in the woods that matter to me? You might enjoy digging around. That work has led to things like this and to some other work that Angie Gupta on our team and Emily Dombeck and Jeff Jackson are very involved in, creating new lists of recommended trees to plant. This list is from Minnesota DNR. They have this list of trees likely to thrive in Minnesota's changing climate, and you can see the color code up at the top, kind of showing, for which regions of the state. And okay, this one's orange. Okay, black oak, yeah, that could work there, but black cherry, maybe not. It's more over here. Again, you can dig into this. There's a link to this document right here if you download my slides later on. So there are good resources out there like this from DNR and others coming from Extension that can help you choose some of these species and make a plan for the future. And all of that, again, is grounded in this ecological science to describe native plant communities. I'm going to close with some practical considerations, just some general ideas that you can think about as woodland stewards to, again, keep your woods healthy and resilient. One, okay, so this maybe seems weird. Didn't I just tell you to get seed from elsewhere? Well, I kind of did. But look at what's happening. So on my last slide, I had this idea of the natural or the ecological trajectory of your woods. You want to notice what's happening in your woods ecologically. And as a general principle, if something is thriving in your woods, and if you look and it's really regenerating well, that means there are a lot of young or small trees of that species. Chances are it's well adapted, at least early in its life, to the conditions it's experiencing there. So think about, helping those species that are already thriving. They may be the same species that thrived, in the last rotation 50, 60 years ago. They may be different species. And it's not that they're going to always do great. Again, as the climate continues to change, the way that those species perform relative to their competitors might change. But it's a good idea generally to look at what's doing really well, especially if it matches with what's expected to do well in the future, and to favor it. So one way to do that is a picture I took in Pine County. So this is a mixed hardwood stand. You see some basswood in here and some oak, some maple. And then there's this patch of young big tooth aspen. This whole area in the middle of the picture is this young, obviously clonal patch, meaning it's all from root suckers that have grown up into this patch. And Bill Foss, the DNR forester who was leading me around on this walk through the woods, talked about how they were planning to open up the areas around the edges of this big tooth aspen patch that's just growing super vigorously, because that's an opportunity for them to create diversity within this stand. They're going to maintain some of those bigger, older basswood and maple and oak, but they're also going to create this younger patch, which gives them species diversity, response diversity to wind and to other disturbances, and that favors a species that's really thriving on this site right now. So this is an approach that you can use as well. Diversify. So timber harvesting isn't the only source of disturbance in our woods, obviously. Windstorms, droughts, floods, insect outbreaks, all sorts of other things. But timber harvests are the only one of those that we really have any control over. So it may or may not be the right choice for you to harvest or to create openings in your woods. The age of your trees, the size, shape, quality, all of those things, access to a road, all of these things might constrain your ability to interest a logger in harvesting wood from your property. But if you do have an option, and if you look at, Google Maps or satellite images and you see that, all the woods around my place kind of look the same. And if you're driving around and everything kind of looks the same, think about introducing some openings. They don't have to be big, just like that big tooth patch I showed you a moment ago. These openings can create little nuclei of new growth that's well adapted. What I wrote here is that allows natural selection to start over. So, the big old oaks here that you see on the edge of this harvested patch, they might be 40, 50, 60 years old. Natural selection 40, 50, 60 years old was a little different from what it is now. So it doesn't mean we should get rid of those, but starting over, creating growing space for a new crop of trees that are subject to natural selection today, the conditions we're experiencing today, can be beneficial. So I said earlier, I showed you the maps from the climate atlas of black spruce. And I said, well, it looks like it's going to get a little less common, but it's not going to go away. So if you have stands that look like this, whether they're large or small, those might be kind of climate refuges. Those, what I wrote here, north facing slopes, so they get less drying, less heat and dryness from the sun. Other stands like that, obviously bogs are low-lying, wetlands here are low-lying stands. They're going to be cooler and they're going to be wetter. And so those might be, a lot of ecologists are looking at those sites as potential refuges. They might dry a little bit as, or not, depending on what happens with future rainfall. And they might create opportunities to maintain cooler, wetter conditions where some of those subboreal species, you see tamarack and black spruce pictured here, some aspen on the edge, where species like that might continue to thrive, even as uplands and ridges might become more extreme environments and more challenging for some of our native species. So that brings me about to the end of my talk. I wanted to leave plenty of time for Q&A. And I told you earlier I'd have my last slide, or excuse me, my link here to download the slides on my last slide, so you can see it here. Obviously, my email address is there too, and I'd welcome you to reach out. But it looks to me like we've got a few questions coming in. So Gary and Lauren, how do you want to handle those? Do you want to fire them to me or?
Yes, Lauren, you can start with questions, but keep your slide set up, Eli, and then we'll change after we're done with questions, just in case you have to go back.
Yeah,
so,
we'll do.
Lauren, do you want to start with your question? And then we'll flip back and forth to chat.
Yep. First question, what protocol works well to document the changes over time to the forest?
That's a great question. Most of us, so like I showed all those temperature records and climate records earlier. So you can think about this on different levels. For your woods or your cherished place, it might be a state park, it might be land that you own, whatever it is. There's a lot we can do. Just going out and observing, keeping your own journal. People talk about farmers who have been on the land for a long time, have written in the date that they planted corn every year, going back 60, 70 years, whatever it is. Those can be really, really interesting records that are super hyper local. So one way to do it is by doing that. there's a lot of variation year over year. And, if something changes this year or next year, that doesn't mean that it's changing rapidly, but having those records over a long time can be interesting. But there are really great platforms, iNaturalist, Nature's Notebook, and other platforms that allow us to just use the smartphone that we have in our pocket all the time to report, just to upload photos and document species and what's happening with those species in the places that we go. And those records can be really useful to ecologists because they're from all different people from all across the region and country and world. And they can give us, a very different kind of information from what's happening right here. And those can be great. And actually, we have kind of a fun thing going. I hope, and I'm guessing most of the listeners are subscribers to the My Minnesota Woods email. We have a little thing going on now where Emily Dombeck wrote, "We want you to show us your buds." Where we have a little fun bud break photo. It's not a contest, but we'd love to have you send us your photos. So if you get that My Minnesota Woods newsletter, look for the information there, post them to Facebook or to Instagram or wherever you do that sort of thing. Or email them to Gary, email them to me, email them to Emily just by hitting reply to that My Minnesota Woods email. But those little records, just pulling out your phone, taking a picture, sharing it, those can add up to really useful records if a lot of people do it.
Just have one major question, but Eric mentions good to see everybody from former co-workers Extension. Thanks for doing these events. Thank you, Eric, for joining us today. And then Lauren did put in Eli's message there, the Z link for his presentation. I put in also a link for the Minnesota Native Plant Communities, so you can get that in chat. And then our first question here is when you have a stand that's too thick, how do you select which trees to thin? I have red pine, not a lot, but there are too far away or too close. Or they're far too close and getting leggy. I hate to take down any trees, but know I need to. How do I best select what to leave and what to take? And then how much room do I leave? So there you go.
Yeah, Jennifer, that's a great question. So, and it's a tough one kind of for red pine plantation. So I'm just guessing here. You can correct me in the chat if I'm wrong. I'm now looking at the chat. But a lot of red pine stands are plantations. So they're trees that they were all planted at the same time. They're all about the same size and they're really close together because you want early stand closure so that you get rid of, through self-thinning, you get rid of a lot of those side branches and you get clear wood. The problem with that is that if they are not thinned as the stand grows, and they really should be thinned at about 35 years and then maybe every 10 years or so thereafter, depending on stand growth. Silviculturally, that would be optimal, and you're pulling products out and earning some revenue with every one of those thinnings as well. But there are a lot of plantations, a lot of stands. Yeah, I see that you said they were planted by the prior owner. So you're not alone. There are a ton of those stands across Minnesota. How do you select? So you have a couple of questions. One, how do you select which ones to take? So ideally, you would leave behind the winners and take out the losers. So how do you know which trees are kind of winning and which ones are losing the competitive battle? It's all about tree crowns. Look at the crown of the tree, the live crown of the tree where the needles are growing. And some of those trees, even though they all look about the same, some will have bigger, taller, fuller crowns. Those are the ones that are likely to respond best to thinning because they have the largest kind of engine to photosynthesize, to produce nutrients, to feed that growing tree and to keep it stable. But you can't open them up too much because they also, if they're that tightly packed, they have a pretty thin stem. And if you think of a very tall mast with a big sail, but the mast is really thin, they can fall over pretty easily. So what you would want to do in a situation like that is to make multiple, a logger would say, or a forester would say, to make multiple entries. So take out just a few trees at a time. A few is obviously relative to the size of the stand. but don't do a big major thinning that's going to really open it up, because chances are you'll have a lot of those remaining trees topple. But look for the ones you should remove are the ones with small crowns that are really, really skinny, that might be beginning to fall over already, depending on how old and how tight this stand is. But I would really encourage you, Jennifer, to try to find a way to get that done soon, because the longer you wait, the more of a problem it's going to be. And as those trees get bigger and they start to die, you're going to have bark beetle outbreaks, and red pine can handle bark beetles just fine. Bark beetles don't typically kill red pine. But when you have trees that are super stressed out because they just have these tiny crowns and they're all packed in, it can be harder. Those trees just don't have as much energy. And so ideally, you would do multiple entries to gradually open up that stand. You'll see the stems begin to thicken up and get stronger and more wind firm. And hopefully that stand is young enough that you can kind of nurse it or nudge it toward a healthier and more resilient condition. I hope that helps. Take out the spindliest, smallest crown trees and not too many of them at a time. Gradually increase growing space, and hopefully that'll help.
Eli, would another comment be, would you want to consult consulting forester or get some help with that, or a DNR forester?
Yeah, absolutely. And that depends too, Jennifer, on your ability and your comfort with a chainsaw. So if you or a friend or family member or whatever is comfortable doing that work yourself, it can be done. And if those trees aren't too big, it can be done. Obviously, as trees get bigger, the risk to yourself, there's always, chainsaws are extremely dangerous equipment. We often just kind of take for granted and don't think about it, but they are super dangerous. So wear chaps, they're not cheap. $50, you can get a very good pair of chainsaw chaps. Hearing protection and a hard hat are a good idea because branches fall unpredictably. And if you can do that yourself, that's a great. Yeah, I see that. Excellent. You're good with a chainsaw. Perfect. Go for it. But yeah, Gary's idea of talking to a forester is a great idea. I'm guessing, Jennifer, especially from your last comment, the size they are now, I'm guessing that these are smaller trees. Loggers are probably not going to be very interested. So until trees are, I don't know, 6 to 8 inches in diameter, 6 inches in diameter, sometimes a little smaller, there's really not much of a market. So a logger might not, you'd have to pay a logger to come in and they might not be very interested. Anyway, I know we got other questions. Jennifer, I'm happy to follow up a little bit later. Talking to a forester, as Gary says, is always a good idea. So I would never talk someone out of it. In this particular case, it sounds reasonably straightforward, and so it wouldn't hurt, but it sounds like, Jennifer, you might be well positioned to move forward on your own. What's next?
Lauren, go ahead.
Okay. Did the boundary waters blow down recover naturally, or were there any artificial plantings done to aid its recovery? I've seen blowed down areas in northern Wisconsin where the landscapes are still 5 years after the event, dominated by brambles, weeds, and invasives.
That's a really interesting question. So I'm not aware of any planting that occurred in the boundary waters, even in a research setting. It's not that it's absolutely banned. I mean, it's not. Nobody really does it, and it's not supposed to happen. I mean, it's a natural landscape and it's not supposed to be tinkered with. So there wouldn't be large scale plantings. It's possible that people like Lee Freilich, who study the ecology of the boundary waters, have done some experimental plantings. If so, they're very small scale. But the boundary waters has recovered remarkably. Just last week, we did a big event up in Ely on the Pagami Creek fire that occurred in 2011. It burned 93,000 acres in the area, kind of north of Ely and east of Ely. That area has come back really profusely to aspen and jack pine and a variety of other species, depending on where you are. The Ham Lake fire, the Cavity Lake fire have also burned in those areas. And up there, they come back quite well. That's partly because there are very few invasive species up there because of the limited settlement and roads and people planting things and whatever else. But yeah, that area has come back quite well. There have been, again, fires, and there will be more those are fire dependent forests. There should be fires in there. But yeah, they're coming back pretty well. The sites in Wisconsin, I can't comment on because I'd have to see them. I do know that the Muckwa Barrens is a fairly large area in kind of north central Wisconsin that are maintained by the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest as barrens. They're maintained as very open ecosystems with fire, primarily with fire. Because that before European American settlement, that was kind of the predominant ecosystem type. And if you like blueberries, you would be happy in the Muckwa Barrens in the summer. The place is just absolutely crawling with blueberry pickers, and it's wonderful, really neat system. But that sounds different from what the question was about. But there are some areas that are fairly extensive in northern Wisconsin that are intentionally maintained as open systems for that reason.
Eli, we have a fire-related question. How does the fire fit into the equation? Should I be looking at burning my 6 acres to increase the health of my stand?
So that's a great question, Eric, and it's good to see you too. Yeah, it's been a little while. I don't know. I really couldn't give you an answer now. So many of the forests across Minnesota are fire dependent. We're learning as a research and just as a community that indigenous communities burned very frequently and quite extensively, and really played a huge role in shaping the composition and current condition of our forests. Of course, that stopped with the really intense focus on fire suppression and stopping ignitions, stopping intentional ignitions across the last century and a half. And we're seeing real interest and understanding growing now of the important role that fire plays at controlling ticks, controlling fungal and other diseases that are killing trees, maintaining healthy open stands, maintaining species like blueberry and sweet fern and others that depend on fire. And so, Eric, it's very possible that your woods would benefit from a fire, but I don't know where that stand is or what species are in there, how dangerous it might be. If you are going to burn, you really, really need to be cautious to make sure that you don't inadvertently cause a wildfire on adjacent or nearby properties. So great question. I'm really glad you're thinking about it, but I can't give you a good answer right now.
Next question in Q&A. What is your top tree ID guide / book for Minnesota?
That's a good question. We have a basic one just called Minnesota Trees, and then there's a beginner guide to Minnesota trees, and we have the digital version of the beginner guide. That Gary, do you do a follow-up email to all of these things? Can we send that out, or I don't know that
Yes, we can do that.
Yeah, great. So I can send that to you, Gary, that beginner guide.
Yep.
There are a number of other ones. It really depends on your interest. And I don't know what my favorite one is. For trees, probably the longer form Minnesota Trees is a good place to start. Of course, Peterson's and a number of other companies publish other good guides. Which one is best really depends on your preference. Some of them are super heavy on photos. Some of them have line drawings. Yeah, I like those basic Minnesota guides, but there are a lot of good options out there. Sorry, that's a bit of a cop-out, but there you go.
Kristen has actually a comment. There's a chainsaw safety and efficiency training at the Driftless Fork Folk School, and she has a web link there in the chat. So if you're interested in a training.
Yeah, and I just learned the other day that Lauren Larson and Angie Gupta. Lauren is an extension forester in Wisconsin. Angie is here in Minnesota. Through the Minnesota Women's Woodland Network, they're planning a few more chainsaw workshops. And I don't know if the Driftless one is tied into that or if it's different. I can't encourage people enough to take those. They really, with a few basic, with an understanding of the tool and some basic safety knowledge, you can really reduce risk associated with a chainsaw. And when there are accidents with chainsaws, they happen extremely fast and they're very dangerous. So Thanks for sharing that link to whoever did, and I encourage folks to do that, take those classes.
Okay, next question here. Do you happen to know the current status of elm in terms of Dutch elm disease pressure? Wondering if it makes sense to be trying to plant elm again.
Yeah, that really depends on the scale of the planting. So if you're planting a yard tree, there are Dutch elm resistant varieties of American elm that are quite good. There are a number of those varieties. You can check at local nurseries. They're becoming more commonly planted. I know we've got a bunch of it just west of my office here today. I'm on the St. Paul campus. So for a yard tree situation, yeah, look into those resistant varieties, and those can be an excellent choice. For broader planting out in the woods, I would be reluctant to invest a lot of time or money in that, because Dutch elm remains prevalent. And to my knowledge, and Gary, you might correct me, I'm not aware that those resistant varieties are generally available in large quantities or bare root stock, you know, of the type that you would plant across many acres. Is that still true?
I think you're right. I think most of the soil water conservation districts can't get them in bulk, and they're mainly sold in pots at nurseries.
Yep. I think I'm going to jump to Sonia Weber, if I'm reading it right. The question: 40 acres with 60% balsam fir. Okay, Sonia. Oh, I guess I should read. This. So 40 acres with 60% balsam fir that'll individually be removed and the forest mulched this summer due to spruce budworm on the North Shore. Is there a recommendation as to what to do with the open spaces and when to plant seedlings and or disperse seed? Okay, so Sonia, that's a great question. First of all, I'm glad you're doing that. I'm sorry you have to do that. It's kind of a disaster, the condition of balsam fir on the North Shore these last few years. And not to scare you, but you're obviously aware since you're doing this work. But the Greenwood Lake fire that just ripped through Isabella and points north and east of there in 2021, that ripped through a large area that had mostly contained killed balsam fir killed by the spruce budworm. So it's really a problem, and it's a fire risk across a lot of the North Shore. So good for you for being proactive and doing the work or spending the money or whatever to get that treated. As for what to do, it's going to come back like crazy. So if there are species you would like to see, white pine, a lot of people like white pine. It's going to do well in the climate future. But all these species will. Birch, I mean, a number of these species are going to do just fine. And so in your case, I'd be thinking about budget. I would be thinking about what can you get for planting stock or seed, because it's hard to get. You might look at these guides like the Tree Atlas and say, oh, I want some, central Minnesota red oak, just to try it, because that wouldn't be out of the realm. Red oak is not a common species on the North Shore, but it's, as you saw earlier in the talk, it's likely to do better in the future climate. That might be one component of something you'd put in there if you're inclined in that direction. But it'll come back quite quickly and profusely to the species that are already growing there. So I would be looking at supplementing that, if you're interested, meaning getting stuff from offsite if you're really interested in that. If there are species you really like that are projected to do well in the climate future, and where you can get them. And seed sources, nurseries are beginning to ramp up, but the reason that Jeff Jackson and other colleagues here in Extension are starting this new seed collection training is that there's really far more demand than there is supply. And, National Forests and the DNR, they're buying huge volumes, and they're just better set up to capture what's out there. So soil and water conservation districts can be a great place to get it. You also asked about when to plant. Now is kind of the time, as soon as you can get in there in the spring, when the snow's gone and there's not more coming, as there was in northern Minnesota yesterday, today. Now's a good time. Fall can also be a good time to transplant, but generally trees are planted in the spring. Seed dispersal, similar, but can happen across throughout the growing season, depending on the species you're trying to establish. I hope that helps, Sonia.
We're approaching 10 o'clock. We're going to continue recording and answer questions. So past 10 o'clock, but if you have to go, we are recording these webinars and they're available at the Z link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. We have a comment from Sonia, highly recommends the Women's Woodland Network chainsaw class. There you go. Thank you, Sonia. And then Eric also mentions a phone app species identification. It's called Seek, SEEK.
Yep.
It identifies plants, trees, insects, amphibians, and more. So thank you, Eric.
Yeah, and iNaturalist is another great one. If you haven't used it, it's really fun because you take a picture of a leaf or bark or a whole plant, and it can really help you to figure out what you're looking at. So it helps not just with you wanting to report your data, but it can help you to identify species as well. I want to go, Lauren, I'm going to jump to this next one too. I receive a lot of pressure from family and friends to clean up the woodland, removing all dead trees, etc. Can you help me respond to that opinion? And I'm trying to synchronize these photos. I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you these things. I took a couple of pictures just by coincidence a couple of days ago that, yes, might help you, Nona, to answer that question. The pictures were kind of random, but just were of dead trees that had fallen over. So they're called snags. Foresters call them snags. A snag is a standing dead tree that has fallen over. And two of these, they both have dens. So I'll see if I can pull it up. And if not, you can email me and I'd be happy to send them to you to show your complaining family members. But you can clearly see when these trees fall over the dens and the ways that wildlife have been using them. So standing dead trees, or dead trees in general, logs on the forest floor, they're really valuable to wildlife. Are you seeing now? I just dragged one of those photos. Does that show up on the screen? Or are you still only seeing my slide? I'm not hearing.
I only see the slides right now.
All right, so let me change my sharing. New share. I'm just going to share the whole screen now. All right, so now you should be able to see, and I should probably drag you two over here. All right, so this is one of them. This is in a pile of birch that I was collecting for a neighborhood maple syrup evaporator. You can see, the way that a branch broke, and then a woodpecker would have opened that up, and then some species was using that. But the other one I think is even cooler. Is it this one? Where you can see, no, that's not it. You can really see the way that some animal had tunneled in and was using that. So I'm not going to keep looking for the photo, but the answer, Nona, is that a lot of species use and depend on dead wood. It's got really, really important ecological value, and a really large percentage of vertebrate and invertebrate species depend on it. So they might not like it, but it's useful. Beauty or cleanliness or whatever are in the eye of the beholder. So, if your whole family, this is the other one that I think is cool. So if your family really doesn't like it, maybe you clear the areas that they use a lot or get rid of some of that dead wood, but leave it in the other areas. So this is the other dead tree that had fallen. And not only can you see the den that was here, but this is the nesting material. And someone with more time, I was late for a meeting as I was walking by, and more ecological knowledge might be able to identify what was using this. But some species, here's the opening, just carved out. So way more species than you might think are using these dead trees. It's only evident to us sometimes when they fall over and then we can see the den, but they're used a lot. So I hope that helps you to fend off your family members who want it all to be clean.
Patricia, yes, iNaturalist was mentioned by Eli. You can look it up online. Chris has, man, I wished I'd heard this talk before. I let my parent persuade me to take down almost all of our old hollow maples. So there you go.
Ah,
Yeah, and then I did type in, I don't know if you can see it. Let's see, maybe I'll have to blur my, or just no. Yeah, anyway, Wilby Smith has a book out.
yes.
That's nice. I don't know if you can see it or not, there somewhere. There we go. Anyway, it's a
Yeah,
great.
that's a big one. Yeah,
Very
yes. So someone,
It's probably
that's a
expensive.
big, heavy book. It's not one to
Yes.
carry around in the woods
No.
with you. It's an excellent guide.
Right.
But yes, and Gary, I'm glad you mentioned that one, but not one that you'd take into the field, but
No,
one that you'd
no.
maybe grab a sample and bring it back home.
That's right.
All right, so where are we now?
Lauren, any more questions?
I'm happy to keep going with questions. Yeah, as long as people are still here and we've still got people around.
Yep.
I'll go to Lorna Grant, and I don't know how to. Okay, there we go. I'm hoping to do a controlled burn under my black spruce and red pine stand. Would this be something I should hire out or something I can do myself with a little training? Lorna, there are a couple of issues there. So I'm going to say that you should, I'm going to click here. This is the one I'm answering now. I would get help on that because on the one hand, it's something you may be able to do yourself. On the other, there are some really important things that you're going to need to do. You're going to need to have fire breaks established. You're going to need to do it at the right season and or in the right conditions that you are confident that it'll succeed. The fire will carry. It's dry enough and the right kinds of fuels that it'll carry through your woods. And then you need to be certain that you can stop it at the edge of your property or involve your neighbors if they're interested as well. And you will need a relatively large crew in order to be able to do this safely. So the challenge is that it's hard to find much training on prescribed fire. We're looking into whether that's a new area that we want to develop some programming here in Extension. And I've been talking to some people about that. And there are contractors who can do it. So if you look around, you might be able to find contractors to help you with that. But it's a risky thing, and I would encourage you to look into it. It can be a very good thing for your woods, but I would strongly encourage you to make sure that you have the knowledge and the equipment and obviously the permits and so on to do it safely. Tyler Carlson, will native plant communities likely move in tandem in response to climate change, or will different species respond differently, leading to dramatically different plant communities, particularly thinking about expanding the lens to include the non-tree species in the plant community? Great question. Great question. It's a little bit hard to know. So if you drill down a little bit into, I see, Tyler, that you said I'm interested in going beyond the trees, but if you drill down into the native plant community information that I referred to earlier, again, you might Google Minnesota DNR ecological classification system. If you look there and maybe add the word silviculture, you'll find some excellent guides that John Allmendinger, who's now retired, and Dan Hansen developed along with others. And then Ashley Leonard came in and did some really excellent work. She's no longer with DNR either. They're trying to refill that position now. But they developed what they call these silvicultural interpretations. And they designed those for foresters and wildlife managers and others who are managing on state lands. They're publicly available, so anyone can look at them. And Tyler, even if you're not thinking primarily about trees, you might find those silvicultural interpretations really useful because they give you a sense for how these plant communities change over time. Now, it's not necessarily, they do have a lot of information in there about how they're expected to change relative to a changing climate. But mainly what they developed was how these plant communities change over time under a stable climate. And so early on, you have this species mix, and then at age 80, you get this species mix. At age 150, things change, and these go down and those go up. And at least looking at that and combining that with what you know about a changing climate and the information you can find about that might put you in a good position to make a best guess. But it's tough. There's an awful lot of uncertainty in trying to understand how these systems work and kind of make your best guess. So I hope that helps.
No, Another comment.
I got to take the deer one, Gary.
Okay,
So,
go ahead.
in your opinion, how concerned should we be with the number of deer? Wait a minute. Oh, now it disappeared. I clicked it too fast. But the number of small trees being killed by deer. I'm pretty sure that that's what it said. That's a big problem. It's thorny politically because, and not just politically, it's a complicated thing. The way that we fund a lot of conservation in this country and in Minnesota is through hunting license sales. So the revenue from hunting licenses is really, really important to everything from state park budgets to our ability to plant trees and support conservation efforts of all different kinds, fish stocking and all sorts of things. And hunters obviously want lots of deer. And in order to have a big hunter population, you need a big deer population. But deer cause huge changes to forest composition. They eat oaks, they eat white pine, they eat northern white cedar, much more than they eat many other species. And there is a lot of ecological research documenting changes, long-term changes to forest ecosystem compositions because of deer. So what does that mean? We have a public interest, in a sense, of having a lot of deer, unless we change, which we should, change the way that we fund conservation. But as woodland owners, we really need to find ways to limit the negative consequences that deer create in our woods. So John Geisler at the St. John's University, St. John's Abbey Arboretum in Collegeville, and Tom Kroll before John have done some really impressive work to figure out ways to regenerate oak. They have a number of stands that look like the picture here. In fact, it's funny. The event that brought us to this photo that you see on the screen now, the in-person or the classroom portion of that was at St. John's. St. John's is a real leader in things like developing fencing, using these tree tubes, investing, because the community there uses their wood a lot. They depend on the wood that they produce in the Arboretum. They rely heavily on oak. And so they have really figured out how to do it, but it costs money. Big multi-acre deer exclosures are expensive and out of financial reach for most of us. So tree tubes can help. Bud capping can help. There are techniques out there that you can do that are not expensive. But yeah, to answer the question, deer are having a big impact, and there's no big, obvious, widespread solution. Deer are part of the system too. They're more abundant than they should be. But again, there are complex reasons why that's the case and why that's maybe not too likely to change.
Back to a comment in chat. Eric mentions, yes, please provide us some training. I assume that's some fire training. Contractors are expensive, and many of us have small enough properties that we could manage a burn with training and help with neighbors and friends. I know some rural fire departments do that too. So you may want to check with your local fire department. I think they would be less than the contractors, and maybe just a donation for their fire department might be enough. I'm not sure. But you might want to check with your local fire department.
Excellent idea. Yes, a lot of volunteer fire departments do offer those services or might be available to help. Excellent. And Eric, I hope we will be able to help with that training. It'll take us a little bit to get that up to speed, but I hope we'll be able to do that. I'm looking at a question from Megan Herbst. 2 questions. When trying to establish new trees in thinner areas, what's an effective way to control invasives like buckthorn? Secondly, for spruce trees, specifically Colorado and black, when should the lower branches be pruned, if ever? Okay, so first we can talk about buckthorn in new areas. The basic approach, I guess, that I would say, you're never going to completely eradicate buckthorn. So Gary has done a lot of good work on controlling buckthorn and other woody invasives. And I think, Gary, you can elaborate, but I think that the basic approach is to, for most people, is to cut and then spot treat with herbicide. Very, very limited non-target effects because you're only applying the herbicide right to that cut surface. Doing that late in the summer or the fall is a good time to do it. And depending on how big an area you're dealing with and how big the buckthorn is that's established there, you might try to clear the whole area and then plant, or you might just kind of create openings. Maybe you would preferentially remove the female buckthorn first. Not all buckthorn produce seed. So if you can get rid of the ones that do, the female, then you can at least slow the rate of seed production and give yourself a bit of a leg up. But you might also just clear spots and then plant trees into those spots, do deer protection so that they can grow, with the idea being that you just want to establish native trees that are going to get through and overtop the buckthorn and be able to grow there. So some kind of treatment, again, cutting and then applying herbicides. Some people are entirely comfortable with chemical herbicides, others are less so, and there are other non-chemical techniques. But my personal view is that those very highly targeted applications of chemical herbicide, it's very different from just flying a plane over and spraying the whole thing. That can be quite effective and cost effective.
Well,
For spruce trees, yeah, go ahead, Gary.
one more comment on buckthorn control. Make sure you treat the stump very quickly.
Yes.
The sap will come up and seal the cut. So you want to get the herbicide on quickly to the stump that's cut. So I recommend maybe 3 people doing the job, 1 person cutting and 1 person treating and 1 person either removing or leave the stem there in the woods, especially if it's a male. If it's female with berries, then you want to remove that from the woods.
Yep. John Selno put in, that's great, put in an article from the Brainerd Dispatch about an event at Camp Ripley, a learn and burn event. So anyone in striking distance of Camp Ripley, check it out. That sounds like a great event. Okay, so the second part of Megan's question is about pruning spruces. So the issue there is about Rhizosphaera and other fungal needle cast diseases. And the issue that those diseases often come in, not always, often come in on lower branches and work their way up. And so if you get better airflow that dries that area out a little bit more quickly, then the needle cast diseases might be less impactful. What I would say is that in general, you want to not remove too much of that crown, because the tree needs its crown in order to photosynthesize and grow. And those low branches, even though they're low in the crown, they tend to have a large surface area. They're way out around the outside. If you think about the volume of a circle, the last, foot or whatever, the outside of the circle, a small distance in diameter can have a big impact on area. But once the tree is tall enough that you can remove those lower branches to improve that airflow without really negatively impacting the tree, I would go ahead and do it, and just be mindful to retain at least half, ideally 60-70% of that crown when you do that pruning, because again, you don't want to just leave a little Christmas tree or a little triangle on top of a tall empty stem. That the tree will not likely do well under that condition. You'd be trading one risk for another. Hope that helps. And by the way, so it's 10:18. I've got about another 10 minutes. I do need to go at about 10:30. So let's get through as many of these as we can. It sounds like tamarack faces some increasing risks from the larch beetle. And I know black spruce is having trouble with eastern dwarf mistletoe. I think I read that more than 50% of Minnesota black spruce stands have mistletoe now. Do you have any suggestions for the best way to maintain healthy ecosystems in forested wetlands going forward? That's a really good question. I don't have a great answer for that. At a small scale, it is, well, there's not too much you can do. I guess what I would say is maintaining vigor of those trees. So we had the question from Jennifer earlier about her really dense red pine stand. And what I said in response to that question was try to keep that stand, try to remove some trees to increase the growing space available for the other trees so their crowns can expand, so they can get more energy and grow. And I would say the same thing here. Obviously, if you see, making sure that the trees that are out there are not too densely crowded and have room can help. Obviously, if you see new infestations of eastern dwarf mistletoe, you can fell those trees and remove that material from the stand, which will reduce its ability to spread. There's not really too much you can do about eastern larch beetle, unfortunately. It's going to come through most areas and it's going to kill most of the tamarack. Tamarack is regenerating in those areas. It has to be a certain size, at least a couple inches, maybe more in stem diameter. It can be, there will be a future tamarack resource. Hopefully we can get some handle on this bug, but I would really focus, Cale, in those situations on maintaining stand vigor and growing space, and hoping for the best. That's maybe not a very satisfying answer, but you're not alone with that concern. There's real concern about the future viability of our black spruce resource. It's very important economically to Minnesota's mills. And it's, with the demise of fire, the limited burning, it's the only disturbance type in there. And I think, and I have not seen this well documented, so I'm guessing to some degree, but it sure stands to reason, in my mind at least, that reduced fire is a big part of the reason why eastern spruce dwarf mistletoe is becoming so much more common. So without reintroducing fire, it's hard to see how that problem is going to be solved. And it's just exacerbated by the, these shorter winters that are making it harder for loggers to get in and treat these stands and remove the heavily diseased black spruce.
Eli,
Okay. Do you want to take this buckthorn questions? One from Chris Larson, I think down near the end of the chat, Gary. You want to talk about the Metro Parks cutting their buckthorn at 4 inches tall, stripping the remaining leaves over the summer. The plant spends a lot of energy trying to keep the trunk alive, and in 1 or 2 seasons, 4 feet tall. And in one or 2 seasons, the roots have died and rotted enough that they can use the dead trunk to lever the whole thing out of the ground. Huh?
wow, that's amazing. I've not heard that before.
Yeah, sounds like a fair bit of work, but if you can get crews, volunteers or staff or yourself out there to strip those leaves, that's a neat idea. Thanks for sharing that, Chris.
Yeah. Well, Eli, I wonder if we should close and with my last slide sets, can you stop sharing?
Sure. I should stop sharing. You want me to stop sharing?
Yes, go ahead.
There we go.
If you had one more question or something.
No, go ahead, Gary. This has been a lot of fun. Thanks everyone for the questions. It's been great.
Yes, you see the screen there, Lauren and Eli?
Yes.
Yes, and Eli's email address is there on the screen. We thank you so much, Eli, for today's presentation on keeping your woods healthy and resilient. A very excellent presentation. Love it. We do have one more Fridays with a Forester with Angela Gupta next week, and that's a participatory science, could be citizen science. That's the new term that we're using. Spotted lanternfly and more invasive species. And then also there'll be an evaluation as you close out today's Zoom. We'd like you to fill out the evaluation if you can, and also voice your opinions on some future next year topics that we want to cover in next year Friday with the Forester. Also, Eli mentioned the My Minnesota Woods. If you don't get that monthly email of newsletter from My Minnesota Woods, you can access that there. All of our recordings on Fridays with the Forester are at a Z-link, z.umn.edu/Fridays. And we'll try and get something out to everybody here on some of the questions that were asked and some of the resources that we have available and some links. So thank you everyone for joining us. Eli, any closing words?
No, except thanks. Again, I really enjoyed the questions, had a lot of fun and appreciate everyone coming out.
Thanks again, everyone.